That's usually the case. So Lord, help us. Lord, bring back the rain. Lord, don't let this famine go on. Well, and then it went on for another year and another year, 3 years. And then David said, Lord, why? Why is this happening? Is there something we need to know? And God God answered David. And one reason I wanted to bring up God real often in Scripture, and I didn't take time to look up all the different times that God did use nature. God moved on, he made a storm, or he made drought, he made a flood, or just God uses nature to judge people. I think he still does. I I wonder how many natural disasters in our country could be made right by somebody saying, God, why? Let us know why. You know, maybe our leaders need to take take note and say, why, God? Maybe our country could turn around. But anyhow, so in verses 2 and 3, and the king called the Gibeonites and said to them, now the Gibeonites were not of the children of Israel, but of the remnant of the Amorites. And the children of Israel had sworn to them. And Saul sought to slay them in his zeal to the children of Israel and Judah. He had zeal for the children of Israel and Judah. Maybe he thought that he needed to be exclusive or wanted to be exclusive. And maybe he thought he was pleasing the Israelites by doing this. Maybe he thought he was showing the countries around his power. Who knows what he was thinking. But we all know the story of Saul. Preston's been talking about that Wednesday night. And Saul, if there was one thing we could say with absolute certainty, is he did not have his brain working at full power. He didn't think right. And so here, I was reminded in Romans 10:2, it says, I can testify that they are zealous for God, but their zeal is not in line with the truth. So we can be zealous, just our zeal alone does not make what we do or say correct. We can be zealous for the right things. I don't think it was wrong to be zealous for Israel and Judah, but what he did about it was wrong. Verse 3, wherefore David said unto the Gibeonites, what shall I do for you? And wherewith shall I make the atonement, that ye may bless the inheritance of the Lord? It's interesting how he puts this. He talks about atonement. Atonement for the slaughter of the Gibeonites. That's what needed to happen. There needed to be an atonement. Just like Jesus needed to make atonement for us, for the sin that we commit.
For reconciliation.
Yes. And he said that ye may bless the inheritance of the Lord. Israel is the inheritance of God. And Israel right at this time they were dying because of the famine. And so David was concerned about Israel. And he wanted God's inheritance, Israel, to be blessed. And so he said, what can we do to make atonement? Well, does anybody have any ideas what atonement needs?
Blood.
Yes, exactly. In Exodus 32:30, and it came to pass on the morrow that Moses said to the people, you have sinned a great sin. Now remember, the children of Israel had worshipped the golden calf. God did all those miracles, bringing them out of Egypt. And the first time that Moses leaves to go up on the mountain and spend time with the Lord, they start worshiping a golden calf. You know, people are crazy, but just not them. We're also crazy. We do dumb things too. But Moses said, and now I will go up to the Lord, peradventure I shall make an atonement for your sin. So the atonement is something to bring about, like Alice said, reconciliation, to bring about a payment for the sin. In 2 Samuel 20, verse 19, I think this was where that lady saved her city. She says, I am one of them that are peaceable and faithful in Israel. Thou seekest to destroy a city and a mother in Israel? Why wilt thou swallow up the inheritance of the Lord? I liked this verse because she talked about her city as being an inheritance from God. And that's why Joab and his men shouldn't kill everybody in the city trying to get Sheba. And so the way she talked about it was Israel is an inheritance of God. And then one other verse in Hebrews 9:22, almost all things are by the law purged with blood, and without shedding of blood is no remission. And that word is removal, pardon, release. So there are several things that we can notice here. His wrath was being poured out on Israel because of Saul's slaughtering of these people. It's interesting that he holds Israel accountable. So maybe because they had not done anything about this, no one had stepped up and said, no, this is wrong. I'm not sure what could have happened, but God was sending wrath on Israel because of the slaughter of these people, because of their oath that they had sworn before God years before. I was telling Mom, these weren't even the same people that swore that oath before God. But it tells us how important it is, how our treatment of others and keeping our word. Even though the Gibeonites were guilty of lying, God still held Israel accountable for their oath to them, for their promise to these people that they would save them alive. And so David is talking to the Gibeonites now. And the Gibeonites said to him, we have no claim to silver or gold from Saul or from his family, nor would we be justified in putting to death anyone in Israel. So one thing that could have happened, I just read that sometimes they would pay the Gibeonites money. Maybe David could pay them money for the fact that so many had in retribution for the slaughter of the people. But David said, well, what then do you want me to do for you? And so their answer was, in verse 5, they replied to the king, as for this man who exterminated us and who schemed against us so that we were destroyed and left without status throughout all the borders of Israel. And that gives us a little indication of what Saul had done. Let 7 of his male descendants be turned over to us. And the number 7 is number of completion. And we will execute them before the Lord in Gibeah of Saul, who was the Lord's chosen one. I think it's interesting that they realized that Saul was God's chosen king, even though Saul had been wrong in a lot of things he did, but in this instance also. And so David, the king, replied, I will turn them over. So here we see David realized that there needed to be an atonement and blood would need to be shed in order for God to be able to pardon Israel. The Gibeonites called Saul the chosen one of God, and he was. If you remember, God chose Saul to be king. In Acts 13:21, they asked for a king, and God gave them Saul, son of Kish, a man from the tribe of Benjamin who ruled 40 years. Why do you think God gave them Saul?
Because they kept wanting the kings to rule over them.
And naturally speaking, Saul was taller than everybody.
Well, they giving them what they wanted.
They wanted to be like the world,
Yeah.
and the world looks at the natural and the outward man.
That's what they got.
And that's what they
He
thought.
warned them that the king would take your kids, the king would take
Horses, children.
take all your
Yeah.
stuff, really, and that they didn't care.
Right, they didn't. I think it maybe made them a little bit more willing to accept the one that God chose that was really the one he wanted to be king, which was David. But, you know, as I read this, I feel so bad. You know, and I think it's a natural result of reading it. We feel bad when, I mean, these 7 men, can you imagine, they had families. They had loved ones. And they just had the misfortune to be born in the family of Saul. They were Saul's sons. But we don't know their hearts. We don't know why God allowed them to be slain. Maybe they were like their father. I don't know. But that could be a reason, one of the reasons that God let it happen, but we're not told that. So I'm not going to even assume anything there. But notice in verse 7, the king, this is David, had mercy on Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan. You realize that Mephibosheth could have been one of those. The son of Saul, in light of the Lord's oath that had been taken between David and Jonathan, son of Saul. You know, he could have thought, well, God is dealing with the entire nation of Israel, giving them famine because of the oath, broken oath that Joshua gave the Gibeonites. I don't want to be guilty of breaking my oath with Jonathan. And so he wanted to make sure that he could keep that oath. And so there happened to be 7 other ones that he chose. So the king in verse 8 took Armoni and Mephibosheth. This is a different Mephibosheth. The 2 sons of Aiah's daughter Rizpah, whom she had borne to Saul. She was Saul's concubine. And the 5 sons of Saul's daughter Merab, whom she had borne to Adriel, the son of Barzillai, the Meholathite. I'm killing those words, but anyway. In some of the King James translations, it says Michael. It's not Michael's sons. That's error. It belongs to Saul's first daughter. This daughter was supposed to be promised to David. Saul said that. Saul broke his word very often. And so, but she married this other man and had these sons. And so he turned them over to the Gibeonites, and they executed them on a hill before the Lord. The 7 of them died together. They were put to death during harvest time, during the first days of the beginning of the barley harvest. And I've read that that's in April, sometime in April.
It's amazing to me how important God looks at a promise.
Yes. Several things come to my mind. It makes me realize that God's going to keep his promises. When he looks with that, he's so concerned about us keeping ours, he's going to keep his. But he is concerned about us keeping our promises. Don't promise anything very lightly. He's going to hold you to it. Now, remember, too, though, you know, there was a lot of thoughts that went through my mind when reading this. And they were under the law still. We know that. And the law demanded a life for life. But they only chose 7, and I'm pretty sure there were more than the 7 Gibeonites that Saul slaughtered. However, you just think, I just thought, Lord, how could this be a good thing? What about the moms and the dad? How about the sons and the daughters and it's hard to wrap my mind around that. You know what came to my mind though? Guess who else was innocent but died for an atonement for us? Yeah, Jesus. And it's like it gave me an analogy, a picture, again, of what it cost Jesus to die for my sin. And he didn't deserve any of it, but he died for my sin. And I started thinking too, what if God thought, oh, I love Israel. I want to kill innocent people. even though they may not have been innocent. Maybe they helped Saul do that. Probably did. But what might have happened if God just overlooked it because he didn't want to bring sorrow to the people? Could God do that? What do you think?
His love is his love is not indulgent. It's perfect. And it's just.
Yes. What if God had just, when the Israelites had made that golden calf, God could have thought, well, they didn't know that Moses was coming back down the mountain. They thought maybe something had happened. Poor things are just weary and tired and giving all the excuses for them to do that. What would have happened if God didn't judge them?
They would have gone on and continued.
And maybe Jesus wouldn't have died on the cross, because he said, let this cup be taken. Started doing that, he would have stopped.
Right. God wouldn't be God.
Right.
God is holy, holy. And he will not accept us on our terms. It's going to be his terms. And thank God that he's made it easy for us. But then carry it out a little bit farther. God, if we will let him, he works in us to bring us up to his standard. He works in us holiness and righteousness. If we let him, he does. We can't bring God down to our standard. That would destroy. God would be not God. I wouldn't want to serve God like that. But he's holy. What are some of your thoughts about this? Do you have any thoughts that you might add? These are just a few thoughts that I had, but, because it's hard. We're going to read on and see how hard it was to have this happen.
I just started to say that it shows how different we are from God. And yet we know that God is right. Everything he does is perfect. And so we better be careful about questioning him.
Yes.
I love that he doesn't hold back showing what his love really is. The world wants to interpret his love differently. And he's not going to, it's right here. And this is still perfect love. This judgment is called love.
And it helps me to think of this. I think most of us in here have had children. What if weren't we ever tempted to, they didn't really mean that sin that they did. I can't get on them for that. But see how cute they are. See, I love them. I don't want to bring harm on them or punishment or anything like that. What does that do to your child if you're like that? What does it do? And what happens when they're spoiled? What happens when that grows up?
They think God's that way. And they find out differently.
Their life it affects them in a bad way. If people are used to getting their way all the time, are they fun to be around? Are they thoughtful of others? We do them such harm if we let them have their way, if we don't bring punishment when they need it. Well, it's the same with us and God. God, now, he has grace and mercy on us. I'm glad we live in the age of grace. However, God hasn't changed. We still need, like Mom said, I appreciate, even if we don't understand what he does. And that's simply because he's God and we're not. And he created the world. I don't understand how he created the world. My understanding is quite a bit less than his, to put it lightly. And so we can trust the God that gave his son for us. We can trust that he's doing the very best for everyone. We can trust him for that. We can stake our lives on that. Let's go on. And verse 10. And Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah, took sackcloth and spread it for her on the rock from the beginning of harvest, this is in April, until water dropped upon them out of heaven, and suffered neither the birds of the air to rest on them by day, nor the beasts of the field by night. And it was told David what Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah, the concubine of Saul, had done. She had 2 of her sons in those 7, and the 5 from Merib. And there might have been some cultural things here that we don't know about. You know, I looked up, I wanted some commentary to tell me what's going on here. Nobody could. Sometimes you can't find the answers. But it seems that she was, what they did was they hung those 7 men. They were hanged. And instead of taking their bodies down and burying them, they left them hanging there. And she, as the mother of at least 2 of them, didn't want the beasts of the field and the birds of the air to desecrate their bodies. So she stayed there, and she would have to stay there all the time, because you can't, if you turned your back, I can't imagine staying there. But she stayed there from April probably till October. About 6 months is what several of the different commentaries said probably happened. So that's an amazing thing to me.
So they couldn't be buried?
They weren't buried until rain came. Almost till they could see that God had accepted the atonement. And then rain came. So let me read you, I thought it was good what one commentary said. These 7 sons and grandsons of Saul were publicly executed by the Gibeonites at the beginning of barley harvest early in spring. As their bodies hung suspended from their places of exposure, Rizpah, mother of the first 2, refused to take them down and bury them. In great grief, she lamented for them on a rocky ledge until the coming of the drought-breaking rains. The reason for her action is not entirely clear, unless she viewed the vengeance of the Gibeonites as being at the same time the vengeance of God against the land for Saul's sake. The fact that the bodies remained where they were until it rained suggests that God's curse had been on the land and now rested on the executed sons of Saul, for anyone who is hung on a tree is under God's curse. The coming of the rain meant that the curse was ended and the corpses could be taken down and buried. Though the law stated that a body hung from a tree must be removed by sundown, it implied punishment of an individual for his personal crime. This case had nothing to do with any personal act of murder, but rather with violation of a covenant, the results of which brought God's displeasure on the whole nation and required vengeance of a public and extended nature. That didn't help a whole lot, but some. And so, but we see that David heard what she was doing. And then in verse 12, David went and took the bones of Saul and the bones of Jonathan his son from the men of Jabesh Gilead, which had stolen them from the street of Bethshan, where the Philistines had hanged them, when the Philistines had slain Saul in Gilboa. This was quite a while ago. I don't know how many years, because we don't know the time period where this chapter took place. However, remember the story how Saul and Jonathan got slain, and the Philistines, in coming back to the battlefield, they come and get all the spoils. They get the armor, they get the weapons, and whatever they can find on the fields. And so then they took Saul and Jonathan and hung their bodies up outside of the city. And so the men of Jabesh Gilead, they were the ones that real soon after Saul had become king, he saved them from annihilation by some enemies that had come in. Saul came to bat for them, and they never forgot it. And so instead of leaving those bodies hanging, they went, and at risk to their own lives, they took them down, and they went and buried them in, where does it say? Buried they in the country of Benjamin Zela. So anyway, wait a minute, that was, yeah. I think that was the word. No, Street of Bethshan. No, I don't know where.
Verse 14.
Yeah, but that was what David did. So I'm not sure. They were just buried where the Jabesh Gilead where those people were. And so David went, and it was an act of respect. It was an act of mercy. So he went and got the bones of Jonathan, and remember, this was his best friend. And Saul, he took them, and they buried them in the country of Benjamin, in Zelah, in the sepulchre of Kish, Saul's father. So in the family sepulchre. And they also took then the corpses of Saul's sons and buried them there. After that, God was entreated for the land. So I still have a lot of questions. When we get to heaven, maybe we can ask God. But I do, it kind of gave me just another analogy about how awesome it was that God allowed his son to be killed for us as an atonement for us. And like Mom said, that it's very important that we keep our promises made with people. And really, it doesn't matter if we want to excuse ourselves by saying, well, this guy's not since he's not a very good guy, I don't need to worry about my promise to him. I mean, that might enter our minds sometimes, but we need to keep our promises. And then the last part of this chapter, I thought I'd get a little farther than this, but verses 15 through 22 is a little bit different subject. Moreover, the Philistines had yet war again with Israel, and David went down and his servants with him and fought against the Philistines. And David waxed faint, and it was because he was older. And Ishbi-benob, which was of the sons of the giant, the weight of whose spear weighed 300 shekels of brass in weight, he being girded with a new sword, thought to have slain David. So the Philistines had these, they were I don't know if you'd call them a tribe, but a group of giants that were part of their armies, they're part of their land, and part of the Philistines. So they were good warriors because they were taller and bigger and stronger than everybody else. But Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, which was also remember Joab's brother, succored, which means to surround, protect, aid, succored David, and smote the Philistine and killed him. No, I like this guy. He was a good guy. He was not like Joab. He was impetuous, and he very often would say, David, let's kill him! David, let's kill him! Several different times. And he said that about Saul. He said it about Shimei. It was the same guy. But here he kills this giant and helps David out. So he was a good friend of David. And smote the Philistine and killed him. Then the men of David sware to him, saying, Thou shalt no more go out with us to battle, that thou quench not the light of Israel. Because David had a lot of respect from his men, from Israel, and they didn't want him dying on the battlefield. And so they saw that he was getting too old. We all get old, and God didn't keep David from it just because he was his man after his own heart. He got old just like everybody else does. And they called him the light of Israel. In 1 Kings 11:36, God says, And to his son will I give one tribe, that David my servant may have a light always before me in Jerusalem, the city which I've chosen me to put my name there. So then, in verse 18, it came to pass after this that there was again a battle with the Philistines of Gob. And then Sibbecai, whoever that guy is, the Hushathite, and this man was listed among David's mighty men. He slew Saph, which was of the sons of the giant. And there was again a battle in Gob with the Philistines, where Elhanan, the son of this Jaggai, a Bethlehemite, slew the brother of Goliath, the Gittite, the staff of whose spear was like a weaver's beam. And there was yet a battle in Gath, where there was a man of great stature, that had on every hand 6 fingers, and on every foot 6 toes, 24 in number, and he was also born to the giant. And when he defied Israel, Jonathan, the son of Shimei, the brother of David, slew him. This is a different Jonathan, obviously, because Saul's son has been dead for a while, but he was David's nephew. These 4 were born to the giant in Gath and fell by the hand of David and by the hand of his servants. And the common thread in all of these verses is that it was giants that came against David and his men. And who was victorious? Who was victorious here? David and his men in every instance. And so I just like the fact that we are reminded that David and his men, normal people, were victorious against the giants that came, the enemies that were giants. So, does anyone here have giants in your life? I think at one time or another we've had what we can call giants. And so is there victory for us? Amen. Amen. God will give us victory over our giants, just like he did with David. No giant can stand against the people of God. And so I'm going to hand out questions, but I had thought that we might get through a little bit of the next chapter 22. Not a whole lot, just the first part. But go ahead and read. In fact, this chapter 22, and as much as this chapter 21 was real hard, I love chapter 22. It's great. Read it. You know, I'm going to try and read it every day. Now, I've already studied it, but I want to read it every day next week before we meet again. So if you would like just a challenge, see if you can read that chapter every day. And then you'll have some neat comments for us when we gather together next week. It's a wonderful chapter, but I have a lot of questions too.
Is this one that's in Psalms?
Yes, this is the same, almost word for word, as chapter 18 in Psalms. And so you can read that too. It's slightly different, just a couple of differences. And nobody really knows exactly when this was written. It's conjectured that it might have been written earlier in David's reign, but I think God chose to put it here at the end of 2 Samuel for a reason. So, pass these out. These are questions. Go ahead and answer the next ones of chapter 22 if you want to. We wouldn't have to. Yes, we are done.
I've got 2 of them from off somewhere. It's done. There's that one.
It's interesting. Eddie Nolan.
Who?
Eddie Nolan.